The fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area hummed a tired, indifferent tune, casting a sickly yellow glow on Clara's drawn face. Her son, Leo, slept fitfully in her lap, his small body radiating a feverish heat that seeped through her jeans. Every cough from across the room, every rushed footstep of a nurse, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. It wasn't just the fear for her 6-year-old's health. It was the gnawing dread of the bill to come, the crushing weight of her empty bank account, and the cold, judgmental stares from the other parents. They had husbands in tow, fresh clothes, and the easy confidence of people who didn't have to choose between antibiotics and rent. Clara clutched the worn strap of her purse, inside which lay $37 and a crumpled photo of a man who was supposed to be here, the man who had promised to protect them forever. A shadow fell over her. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The scent of expensive cologne, a scent designed to mask the rot beneath, filled her nostrils. Clara. Mark's voice was a smooth, polished stone, the kind that looks beautiful until it's used to break a window. Making a scene as usual. What is it this time? A sniffle? He smiled at a passing nurse, a dazzling display of white teeth and feigned concern that made her stomach clench. The nurse smiled back, charmed. Of course she was. Mark was a master of first impressions. Clara felt the familiar wave of humiliation wash over her, hot and suffocating. She was the hysterical ex-wife, he was the concerned father. It was a narrative he had perfected over the last 2 years, a story whispered to neighbors, friends, and, she feared, the authorities. He has a fever of 103, Mark. The doctor is worried about pneumonia. She kept her voice low, a desperate plea for him not to escalate this here, in this public space of quiet suffering. But he thrived on an audience. Her shame was his stage. Mark scoffed, his eyes sweeping over the waiting room, taking in the silent, captive audience. Pneumonia, he repeated, loud enough for the couple next to them to hear. He gestured at Leo's sleeping form. Or maybe he's just exhausted from being dragged around by a mother who can't hold down a job. The words were acid, burning away the last of her composure. He crouched down, his handsome face a mask of paternal love. Hey, buddy, he cooed, reaching for Leo. Daddy's here. Let's get you out of this dreary place. Clara's body went rigid. She shifted, placing herself more firmly between Mark and their son. No, she said, the word a small, hard pebble in the vast emptiness of the room. We're waiting for the doctor. Mark's smile tightened, the charm vanishing to reveal the cold steel beneath. Don't be difficult, Clara. Our son needs a proper home. Not this. His gesture encompassed her worn coat, the scuff on her boots, the very air of poverty and desperation that clung to her. He was framing her as unfit, a narrative that could lead to him taking Leo for good. The tension in the air became a physical thing, a pressure building against her chest. The other parents looked away, pretending to be engrossed in magazines or their phones. Their silence was a verdict. They saw a domestic dispute, a messy affair to be avoided. They didn't see the terror in her eyes. They saw an unstable woman and a charming man, and they chose the path of least resistance. Her mind reeled back, a slideshow of horrors flickering behind her eyes. It hadn't started with fists. It had started with words, little cuts that bled her confidence dry. You're too sensitive, Clara. No wonder you don't have any friends. Then came the control. He took her name off the bank accounts, claiming he was better with money. He'd give her an allowance, a pittance that kept her tethered and humiliated. He broke things, a plate she loved, a gift from her mother, always by accident, his eyes daring her to challenge him. The real violence came later, after Leo was born, when her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of their perfect-looking suburban house. It was always hidden, a bruise on her ribs, a grip on her arm tight enough to leave finger-shaped ghosts on her skin. She remembered her late husband, Daniel, a Marine who spoke in quiet certainties and whose strength was in his gentleness. He taught her that dignity wasn't about being loud. It was an internal fortress no one could breach. Your character is what you do when no one is watching, he used to say. After he was killed in action, that fortress had felt like ruins. Mark had moved in like a conquering warlord, promising to rebuild, only to tear down every last stone. Escaping him had taken every ounce of courage she had. A midnight flight with a duffel bag and a terrified child. But he never let her go. He haunted her, a constant, looming threat. The pressure in the waiting room was becoming unbearable. Mark's voice dropped to a venomous whisper only she could hear. "You're pathetic. Look at you. You can't even afford to keep him warm. I'll be back with a court order, Clara. I'll have him by the end of the week, and you'll be on the street where you belong." He stood up, his public mask sliding back into place. He turned to the security guard who had begun to drift closer, drawn by the rising tension. "It's all right, officer," Mark said with a dismissive wave. "My ex-wife is just a little emotional." "We're fine." The guard, a man barely out of his teens, looked from Mark's expensive suit to Clara's frayed coat and hesitated. He saw power and money on one side, and frailty on the other. He took a half-step back, his duty dissolving in the face of social awkwardness. The silence of the onlookers was a heavy blanket, smothering her. No one spoke up. No one met her pleading gaze. They were all witnesses, yet they were all blind. In that moment, Clara felt a loneliness so profound it was like drowning in open air. She was an island, and the tide was rising. Mark leaned in again, his hand gripping her arm, fingers digging into the muscle. "Let's go, Leo," he said, his voice firm, reaching for the boy. Something inside Clara snapped. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, resolute click. It was the memory of Daniel's words, the fierce, primal love for her son, the last shred of her own self-respect refusing to be extinguished. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She did something far more unexpected. With her free hand, she reached into her purse, her fingers fumbling past the photograph of Daniel, and pulled out the crumpled bills. $37. Her entire fortune. It was gas money, grocery money, hope money. She held it out to Mark, her hand trembling but her gaze unwavering. "Here," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tense silence of the room. "Take it. It's all I have. Go buy yourself a nice dinner, a bottle of wine, whatever you want. Just leave." Alone, it wasn't a plea. It was a dismissal, an act of profound, sacrificial dignity. She was offering him the last of her worldly possessions as if he were a beggar, not a predator. In that small, desperate gesture, she was not the victim. She was reclaiming her power, demonstrating that her son's peace was worth more than her own survival. She was showing him and everyone in that room that he could take her money, but he could not take her soul. The room, which had been a sea of averted eyes, suddenly stilled. Collective breath was held. The woman who had been scrolling on her phone lowered it, her brow furrowed. The father who had been shushing his own crying child now stared openly, his expression shifting from annoyance to something else. He saw the crumpled bills in her hand, heard the quiet strength in her voice, and saw the flash of stunned fury on Mark's face. The cheap theatrics of the situation fell away, and the raw truth was laid bare. This wasn't a messy breakup. This was a monster and a mother fighting for her child's life. Whispers started to ripple through the silence. "Did you see that?" a man murmured to his wife. She offered him her last dollar. The nurse who had been charmed by Mark now looked at him with cold, dawning comprehension. Her professional smile vanished, replaced by a protective hardness as her eyes fell on Leo, then on Clara. The young security guard's posture changed. He straightened his shoulders and took a deliberate step forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. The atmosphere had shifted. The judgment that had isolated Clara was now turning, slowly but surely, toward Mark. It started as a vibration. A low, distant tremor felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It was a faint hum that grew steadily, a deep-chested rumble that seemed to be coming from the very earth itself. Heads turned toward the large plate-glass windows of the emergency entrance. The rumble swelled into a roar, a throbbing, unsynchronized chorus of V-twin engines that drowned out the hospital's hum and the anxious whispers. It wasn't the sound of a single motorcycle passing by. It was the sound of an army. Then they came into view. A river of chrome and black leather flooded the parking lot. One by one, they pulled into the spaces directly in front of the entrance. A phalanx of Harleys, road kings, street glides, fat boys, parking with a disciplined precision that belied their ferocious appearance. 10, 20, 30, 40, 52 bikes. The engines cut out in a staggered, thundering succession, leaving a silence that was more profound and menacing than the noise it replaced. Men, large and imposing, swung their legs over their seats. They wore leather vests or cuts, adorned with the patch of a three-headed wolf and the words "Sentinels of Ash." They moved as one, a silent, intimidating tide of denim and worn leather, their faces etched with the hardness of the road. They walked toward the hospital entrance, their boots clicking on the pavement with a rhythmic, purposeful cadence. The automatic doors slid open, and they began to file in, filling the doorway, their sheer mass seeming to suck the air out of the waiting room. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence was a statement, a wall of silent, unyielding force. The leader of the group, a man with a gray-streaked beard and shoulders as wide as the hospital doorway, stepped forward. His cut was more adorned than the others. Bearing a patch that read Forge, he ignored Mark completely. His gaze, sharp and intelligent, landing directly on Clara. He scanned her face, took in the sleeping child in her lap, and the crumpled money still in her hand. A flicker of something, understanding perhaps, crossed his features. Mark, who had been frozen in place, finally found his voice, though it was thin and reedy. "What is this? Who the hell are you people?" Forge didn't even glance at him. He simply held up a hand, a silent command for his men to hold their positions. They formed a silent, immovable semicircle, effectively sealing off the waiting area. Then, another biker, leaner than the others, with a long, graying ponytail and a patch that read Doc, stepped up beside Forge. He looked at Clara with a strange familiarity. He leaned in and spoke quietly to Forge, but his voice, raspy and low, carried in the stunned silence. "It's her, Prez. That's the woman I told you about." He then looked around the room, his eyes finally settling on Mark, and his voice grew a little louder, clear enough for the onlookers and Clara to hear. "About a month ago, my bike gave out on the interstate, 100 miles from anywhere. I spent my last 20 on a tow to this town. I was sitting outside a diner, hadn't eaten in a day, feeling lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. People walked by, stared at my cut, and kept walking." He paused, his eyes finding Clara's again. "Then she came out. She just finished a double shift. I could tell by the look on her face. She was carrying a small to-go box. She stopped, looked at me for a second, and then she just handed it to me. Said, 'You look like you need this more than I do.' It was a burger and fries. Probably the only meal she was going to have that night. I tried to say no, but she just smiled, a tired little smile, and walked away before I could even thank her properly. She didn't see a biker. She didn't see a threat. She saw a hungry man and gave him her dinner." A wave of shock rippled through the room, stronger than before. Clara stared at the biker, Doc, a vague memory surfacing of a weary-looking man with kind eyes on a cold night. She had forgotten all about it, a small act in a life filled with hardship. She had no idea it would echo like this. Forge's gaze on Mark turned from indifferent to glacial. He took a slow, deliberate step toward him. Mark, for the first time in his life, looked small. His expensive suit seemed like a costume, his bravado a cheap parlor trick that had just been exposed. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. This woman, Forge's voice was a low growl, rumbling with the same power as the engines of the bikes outside, showed more honor in that single moment than you have shown in your entire life. He stopped directly in front of Mark, close enough that Mark had to crane his neck to look up at him. "She offered one of my brother's kindness when he had nothing. That makes her family. And we protect our family." Forge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, Every word was laced with an unshakable promise of violence. You will leave this hospital. You will go home and you will pack your things. You will disappear from her life. You will not call her. You will not email her. You will not come within 1,000 feet of her or her son ever again. If we hear your name, if we see your shadow, if we even sense that you are breathing the same air as them, we will come and find you. There will be no lawyers. There will be no court order. There will only be us. Do you understand me? Mark's face was ashen, sweat beading on his brow. All the bluster, all the arrogance had evaporated. He was just a bully who had finally met a force he couldn't intimidate, charm, or buy. He gave a jerky, terrified nod. Good, Forge said softly. Now get out. Mark practically scrambled over himself to obey, nearly tripping as he scurried toward the exit, not daring to look back. The bikers parted silently to let him pass, their stares following him like the barrels of 52 shotguns. The automatic doors slid shut behind him and he was gone. A collective sigh of relief went through the waiting room. Then Forge turned back to Clara. He walked to the admissions desk, where the clerk was staring wide-eyed. He pulled a thick wad of cash from his jacket, held together by a rubber band, and slapped it on the counter. Whatever her bill is and whatever it's going to be, this should cover it. If it's not enough, you know how to find us. He then walked back to Clara. He reached inside his cut and pulled out a small, immaculately clean patch, identical to the ones on their vests. The three-headed wolf. He held it out to her. Ma'am, he said, his voice now gentle. This is a marker. You're not one of us, but you're under our protection. If you ever need anything at all, you show this to one of us. Or you show it to one of our rivals. It doesn't matter. They'll know what it means. They'll know you're not to be touched. Clara looked at the patch, then up at the formidable man offering it. Tears she had refused to shed in front of Mark now welled in her eyes. She took it, her small hand closing around the stiff, embroidered fabric. It was heavier than it looked, weighted with the promise of safety. The story did not end there. In the moments that followed, the fabric of the community, once torn by indifference, began to reweave itself. The nurse who had witnessed everything approached Clara, her face etched with apology and genuine concern. I am so sorry, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We should have seen. We should have done more. She placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. Your son's room is ready. We're moving him to a private one, on the quietest floor. It's on the house. The young security guard came over, his face flushed with shame and a newfound resolve. Ma'am, I filed a report against him for harassment. I've given a full statement and so have several others here. He won't be allowed back on this property. Ever, the father who had been watching from across the room, walked over, holding out his car keys. When you're ready to leave, please, let me give you and your son a ride. It's the least I can do. The bikers did not vanish. While Forge and the main group eventually filed out, their job done, a handful remained. For of them, silent sentinels of leather and loyalty, took up positions in the waiting room, their presence a quiet, unshakable guarantee that no harm would come to Clara or Leo again. They didn't speak to her, but their watchful eyes followed her as nurses escorted her and a now-stirring Leo to their new room. Hours later, when Clara emerged to get a cup of coffee, she found one of the bikers, a man with a tattoo of a wrench on his forearm, talking quietly with the hospital administrator. He was arranging for a security detail to be posted outside her apartment building for the next month. Another biker was on the phone, calling in a favor to a lawyer friend, ensuring Clara would have the best possible representation, pro bono, to secure a permanent restraining order and full custody. They weren't just offering protection. They were rebuilding the fortress around her life, stone by heavy stone. The final image of that long day was not one of fear or violence, but of quiet, profound belonging. As dawn broke and Leo, his fever finally broken, was cleared to go home, Clara walked out of the hospital holding his hand. The four remaining bikers stood, their vigil ended. As she got into the car of the kind stranger from the waiting room, the bikers mounted their Harleys. They didn't roar away into the distance. Instead, They formed a protective V formation around the simple sedan, two in front and two behind, escorting her home through the early morning streets. The sound of their engines was no longer a threat. It was a promise, a rumbling lullaby of loyalty. Clara looked in the rearview mirror at the steady headlights of her guardians, the sentinels of ash. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of gratitude, of release. Her quiet strength, the dignity she had clung to in the darkness, had not gone unnoticed. It had been a beacon, a small flame that had called an army of angels to her side, angels who rode machines of chrome and steel. In the reflection, she saw her own eyes, no longer haunted by fear, but filled with a calm, steely resolve. She was not a victim anymore. She was Clara, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had shown kindness to a stranger and had, in turn, been given a brotherhood. And she was, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly safe. The sun rose higher, glinting off the chrome, illuminating a new day.